So, I've been at Univision a few years now. When I first got there, one of the challenging things that I stumbled upon was really an inaccuracy and underrepresentation of multicultural audiences in most third-party data sets. And that's a big challenge, right? We obviously represent US Hispanics more so than any brand in the US, probably in the world at this point. And that creates a big challenge for us when most of the third-party data does not see our audience. They're almost invisible. So we had to take it upon ourselves to correct that, really for the industry. And TelevisaUnivision sort of operates in a very unique position. We are arguably the most trusted brand for US Hispanics, and that trust enables us in a privacy-compliant way to really capture a lot of information and data about those people. So that was sort of what pushed us down the path of creating this graph. And again, from that position of trust, we were able to do it fairly quickly. So we've had our graph, it's been in market for about 2 years. The stats on it are really amazing for really only being in existence for 2 years. We have north of 92% coverage of all US Hispanic households in our graph today, and it is highly, highly accurate. So we're excited to have the graph. We're already putting it to use. We've had over 200 brands at this point utilize our graph for activation across both linear and digital. So we're excited to be helping brands better connect with US Hispanics.
Can you talk about some of the work you've done specifically with Truthset and with some of the problems that they uncovered?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we started to dig into these third-party data sets, just anecdotally, it seemed like, hey, there's something going on here. The data doesn't seem like it represents our audience. But of course, we wanted to verify that. We wanted a third party to look at it for us. Lo and behold, Truthset. So we stumbled upon them. This is what they do. They evaluate third-party data sets. And Truthset came back and said of all the data sets that they monitor, roughly 4 in 10 US Hispanics are invisible in those data sets. They found that the coverage was just around 59%. So again, 4 in 10 Hispanics missing in those data sets. That is a shocking number, right? And when you combine that with accuracy, because the reality is you can't go and ask everybody, are you Hispanic, yes or no? Most companies model it. So from an accuracy standpoint, that's also inaccurate. So not only are you missing Hispanics, a lot of times the ones that you're labeling as Hispanic or not Hispanic, that's not correct because you have to model it based on things like surname and geography. So Truthset really helped us uncover all of those details. They were a great partner of ours. We had them verify our data, so the stats around our accuracy, which is north of 90%, and our coverage north of 92% of all US Hispanic households, all verified by Truthset.
So all this work you're doing to verify your audience, how does that affect you doing business in an upfront when a lot of your competitors don't have these kind of issues?
Yeah, so I think it's something that's somewhat unique about us at TelevisaUnivision. I always say to our clients that we're probably the most flexible and transparent with our data out of everybody in the ecosystem. And it's because our mentality is that all boats rise, so to speak, right? So by making our data more available, more interoperable, of course, in privacy compliant ways, we think that's better for the ecosystem. So we're very willing to connect our data and share our data in ways that really enable everybody to have the perfect coverage or near perfect coverage of US Hispanics. And again, doing that in a very, very transparent way. So whether that's connecting our data via clean rooms, whether that's partnering with measurement companies in terms of how our data can make their data more representative, those are all things that we're doing.
Speaking of sharing or not sharing data, is TV starting to become a collection of walled gardens?
I certainly hope not. I do think we're at an interesting point where for years we've sort of been left with third-party measurement because the creators of the content really didn't have data about the consumption of that content. There were always intermediaries, right? Whether that was cable companies or other endpoints. Today, for the first time, as you've seen the rise of CTV and all of our digital endpoints, right? We distribute our content now across hundreds of digital endpoints. We actually have that data. So it's an interesting challenge for the ecosystem in terms of how do we prevent it from becoming a series of walled gardens, right? How do we find really smart ways where we can collaborate, share data, potentially with measurement companies, in a consistent and scalable way so that you still have that third-party verification. It's a big part of why TelevisaUnivision is part of the JIC. So the Joint Industry Committee that we started with a handful of other networks, we talk a lot about that from a standpoint of creating standards for measurement, but one of the most important functions of the JIC is really becoming an engine and a facilitation sort of process where we can collaborate, share data, again in a privacy compliant way, using things like clean rooms, so that you now have a streaming data set. So it's really not a giant walled garden, right, or multiple walled gardens, but we can collect that data, clean that data, again, in a consistent way, and then share it with measurement companies so that they can use it to provide third-party verified audience measurement around our digital endpoints.
Finally, this is a forward-looking question, but do you think AI is going to start playing a much bigger role in media planning and buying?
It's a great question. Look, I think the utility for AI is almost endless. I do think there are pieces of the media planning sort of end of the equation where AI, certainly, and machine learning in particular, I think can come to bear. In terms of the actual buying and selling and the negotiation, that's the piece I'm not sure about. So the reality is the buying and selling of media, it is a negotiation. I think that's a hard thing right now for AI to take over. I do think, again, from the planning and optimization standpoint, yeah, absolutely. We have more data than we've ever had, and it's more complex than it's ever been. And if you think about what AI is really, really good at, right, the notion of dealing with volumes of information and beginning to understand it and decision off of it, I think that's where we'll see it come to bear.